I wanted to I wanted to talk about the natural hazard disclosure report first, because it is an insane amount of information. And I think that it's kind of one of the most underutilized portions of our disclosures. And I think maybe just because it's very, very in depth, and most people don't really want to read it, but I would encourage you, if you've got some spare time, to kind of read through it, because it covers a lot of different areas. And then it's got like a really good key guide. So it'll show the property in question, and then it'll give like a mapping, and then it's got a little guide down here. So it lists everything like hazardous liquid pipelines that would be in like San Bruno, for instance. I think we probably do have some stuff in, pretty sure we have some stuff in Brentwood as well. But anyway, so it kind of goes over those things. And then, or that was actually gas transmission pipelines is what I should have said. Let me admit, Kevin and Sophia.
Okay, I'm confused because you have the real estate transfer disclosure statement up.
Oh, I do? I thought that I had the NHD.
No.
But hang on. Why isn't it sharing the right one? Now can you see the NHD?
No, nothing now.
Okay, hang on. It says I'm screen sharing. Let me try again. Okay, now can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so the NHD report. So like I was saying, I want to this is like a seriously underutilized resource for you, and it's got so much information in it. It's absolutely insane. Hi, Sophia. I want to just kind of scroll down here, and bear with me, because when I'm screen sharing and then I've got the view of you guys, I have to kind of move it around sometimes to see what I'm looking at, like your pictures.
Is Sophia at a disco?
Oh yeah, what's going on there?
There you go.
Oh my God, that's funny. It was just totally flashing. She was at disco, discotheque. Anyways, okay, so here's the table of contents, and it shows like everything that's contained in here, and it's a lot of pages, right? It's a ton. And there's been very few times in my career that my clients have actually read this thing, which is unfortunate. Usually it's kind of like those engineer types, or like extremely detail oriented people that want to like really look at it and see what's going on with it. But I think that it's just an excellent tool. And I wanted to point out, because some people don't realize that this is in here, but there's a whole tax report in here. So if there's special assessments, MOLRUs, any sort of streets and lighting, depends on what it depends on the property that it's in, or where the property is located, but it'll have all kinds of really good information on that. I'm going to move your photos over so I can see the right side. Let me scroll down. Hang on a second here. Okay, so this was all just like everything it's a summary, and it shows everything that basically like a quick synopsis. You know how the residential purchase agreement has everything on basically the first 2 pages, right? So this gives you a summary. It's not in a flood zone. It's not in a dam. It's not in a high fire zone. It's not in a wildland fire zone. It's not in a landslide area, liquefaction. So, that's like seismic. So we're pretty far off like off of the Hayward fault lines and stuff, but they'll have things in here. So like if you're ever wondering, and this comes up a lot right now because we have that new fire hazard disclosure and the advisory, the NHD will tell you if it's in a high fire zone and if that form is required. So just FYI, people don't realize that that's in there. It'll say that you're on a fault line, whether you are, if you're in close proximity, the flood zones, it'll have FEMA maps through here. It's incredible what's in here. Expansive soils. So I kind of feel like, well, we have a lot of clay out here, but I feel like the entire globe has expansive soils, right? I mean, we're on a spinning earth, and you get precipitation and then drying and snow and then dry. And so I think that I think that expansive soils is kind of universal. I've never really like compared 10 of them in a row to see if they all have that. I'm not really sure. But anyways, it'll let you know if you're in, areas. This one has it marked that it's near a commercial and industrial area, which is true. This one's on Birchwood in Garin Ranch, very, very close to downtown Brentwood. So within close proximity would be the whole downtown area, restaurants. There's a gas station on the other side. There's storage, office buildings, the police station. So it's just letting you know that you are within a certain range of commercial area, just FYI. Also, this one mentions the right to farm. So I don't know if everyone knows this, and I don't believe that it's contained within this report because it's a much larger scale, but Brentwood has what they call the BALT, the Brentwood Agricultural Land Trust. And there's a whole section of Brentwood that is devoted to and is restricted to agricultural development. So within that mapping area, and I don't have a map of it, I'll have to try and get my hands on one of those. I haven't seen one, but there are properties specifically like off of Walnut heading to Vasco, like Payne is one of those streets, P-A-N-E, that whole area is in the BALT program. Most of the cherry orchards and farms around there are all a part of it. So those properties are, the use is restricted to making sure that it's development of basically agriculture. So I don't know if anyone knows that, but that's kind of an interesting little tidbit to know. Was anyone aware of that?
I've heard of the BALT thing from David Navarrete.
Yeah.
But I didn't, so like if somebody wanted to buy a piece of land there, is it, they cannot build a home there? It has
No,
to be used for agricultural?
No, so they can have a home on the property, but the outbuildings, like sometimes people want to build another outbuilding, it has to fall in within the scope of BALT. And within that scope is generally like production of, like equipment used in production to harvest stuff. Like cows, dairy, we don't really have dairy here, but so it's kind of there's like restrictions to that. I'll have to pull one up to share because I had at some point with one of my clients, I had a copy of what it prohibited you from doing. But basically you're kind of grandfathered into what the intended purpose is for that area. And you can't just go and build some shop where you're going to be and you're going to have a bunch of motorcycles or dirt bikes. So it's limiting what you can do. And usually it's like, it's like a portion of the land, right? So they'll do like a general kind of like footprint for the house and whatever buildings are there. And then most of the properties that I've encountered that kind of fell into that scope already had like some sort of a crop on them. So the one in question that I was looking at was walnuts. It had a big walnut orchard. And so they're just saying like, look, you can't just be knocking down a bunch of walnut orchards to put in like a dirt track for, dirt biking. Now, my clients in question that were interested in that property wanted to do just that. They have their family super into dirt biking and racing, and they wanted to kind of create a track and this, and that, and everything. And that was not going to fly. They weren't going to allow that. And understandably so. I think it's actually very cool that they've preserved a specific area and that they will not allow developers to come in and just build a bunch of, housing. So they're making sure that our core that is it's such a huge economical, economic piece of our existence here in East County. So I think it just ran off on a tangent, but I think it's important to share. When I saw the right to farm, I'm like, oh yeah, that kind of reminded me of that. Then it also gives you general advisories that are contained within here. The sex offender database, Megan's Law, I'm sure all of you are familiar with what that is. It gives you a description of each one of the advisories. One of the ones that I think is kind of interesting, but probably because I'm a total wildlife geek, is that there's a section for endangered species. And so, for instance, burrowing owls are a protected class under that. And then also there's like a red-legged tree frog. It's kind of interesting what's contained in there. It's little stuff that you would never think of. When a developer or anyone is just trying to develop land, they have to do an environmental impact report. And in that, it has to address whether or not any of these endangered species would be affected and or what the impact of that would be on the environment for them. So that's kind of interesting. And then in most reports, they're usually hyperlinked, so you can go right to that page and it'll tell you what the listed species are. And what the regulations are. So for any part of the report, it'll do that. Question is, how do we get back? Now that I jumped here, there's got to be a way to just jump back up to the top or scroll. Where am I? Okay. Mining operations. Actually, I'm kind of curious if if properties in Antioch near off of James Donlin and near Black Diamond Mines, I wonder if I wonder if there would be anything for like previous mining operations, or if it's just exempt because it's already closed down and not active. Be kind of interesting to know though. Anything on these so far? Oh, abandoned mines. It might come up in the abandoned mine section if like Black Diamond Mines. Any questions? No. Like tsunami map advisory, that'd be scary. Fortunately, we're not near an area that's, you know, likely to happen. Okay, so the tax part. So this actually tells you like what is happening, whether they're Melrose, whatever bond acts. You know, we have in Contra Costa, well, in all the counties in general, you have like a baseline tax of like 1% countywide. And then you have all these little ad valorem and Melrose and all sorts of different taxes that are added in there. There's even one for like mosquito vector control. It's pretty extensive. Melrose, a lot of taxes and bonds will have a sunset on them. What I don't know is how easy it is to find out like how much is left on that bond. Like for instance, in Antioch, Black Diamond Estates, right there by Contra Loma, the hiking area over there. When those were built, they had Melrose, but the sunset on them was like 20 years. So once that expired, it dropped off. And that was pretty expensive. That was, you know, pretty sizable amount. So at least within the NHG report, it will address taxation. PACE is the, this is for basically solar and whatnot, you know, energy efficient, clean energy is what they're trying to establish there. Other district assessments. So it says that there's something in here. So let's see what it says direct assessments are if I just click on this page. No. Okay. Well, it shows, oh yeah, here you go. It shows exactly what they are. Remember I was mentioning mosquito and vector control. Little known fact on mosquito and vector. During the REO days when properties were vacant a lot and there was pools that had turned green, the county will come out and they would put like fish, they would put mosquito fish in the pool to try and offer abatement. And they are an actually really excellent resource. They do all kinds of stuff for skunks, for mosquito, different pests. It's kind of interesting. So
I had to use them to get a dead possum out of my driveway. It was disgusting.
There you go. Exactly. People don't ever know what it's for, but it's actually kind of interesting. I used to write a What the Fuck Wednesday article, and I talked about a pool that I had. It was really sad. I had to fish an animal out of it. But mosquito vector, I was talking about like the range of what they can do. It's pretty cool, and it's free to you. Well, I say it's free to you. We pay it on our taxes, but yeah, those are services that they don't charge. Dawn, did they charge you anything additional on that, or they just come take care of it?
No, they
Yeah,
didn't. No, they just came out. I mean,
Yeah,
it took them a couple of days
yeah.
because the darn thing was in the street, and then a hawk came and took it from the street and dropped it in my driveway, and it was so gross.
Ew.
Yeah. So yeah, I finally had to tell them, look, I'm physically sick. You have to come get this because it smelled so bad.
Ew.
Yeah,
Disgusting.
but they came and got it. I mean, as soon as I said I was literally physically sick, they were there with like in an hour.
Oh, that's good. I love it.
Yeah.
There we go. Anyway, so it breaks out what the assessments are, ad valorem, everything that it is. And then so Brentwood is kind of infamous for this. They have the street lighting and development. So, and they have like parks. So for the most part, Brentwood requires that the developers put in parks. And so there's something like 72 parks in Brentwood. It's insane. It's gotten like Playful City USA multiple years in a row. But the streets and lighting is something that typically the builder will pass on to the buyer. And in this case, that was definitely part of their tax bill, part of the additional and separate assessments that they did. East Bay Regional Park District is pretty commonly on there. The Brentwood Park MNTNC, I don't know exactly what that is, honestly.
Maintenance for the park?
Maybe, but Brentwood Park so this one isn't near Brentwood Park. Brentwood Park is over there off of O'Hara across from what's the name of that subdivision right there? It's right adjacent to Rose Garden.
But isn't it just like a park maintenance for the whole city? Like a
Oh,
portion
you're
of,
right.
like-
I was thinking, you're right. I was thinking Brentwood Park, like the actual subdivision. Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes a lot more sense. Yeah. So if your clients are ever asking like what everything's for, it's literally right here in the NHD report as far as taxes and everything else that you can possibly imagine. What else? That's kind of just like a quick overview of the NHD. Does that make sense to everybody? Anyone have any questions?
I do, I just, what are the most important spots on this report that we should, look at? That
I would-
something might be,
I would say, so this is it depends. It's a, it depends response. It depends on what your clients are concerned with. So the most common things that people are concerned with is taxes, fire zones, flood zones. Those are like the ones that I see most frequently. And I stopped at this page because it talks about whose responsibility it is for wildfire areas, et cetera. So there's some really good information that's contained within the report. But taxes is a big one, especially because there's a lot of new subdivisions, out there on Emerson Ranch in Oakley, the taxes are really high. There's a section of Cypress right to the left, Frank Hengel, Monet, all those streets over there, just off of Cypress to the left, there's a little, there's an elementary school there. They have extremely high taxes. I think it's like 1.8 or 2%. Emerson Ranch is very similar. So this report would break out what the extra taxes are. And that's big to know for people because I've had some clients that were like, listen, I'm willing to pay higher taxes in Oakley and have a bigger house. Other people are like, I'd rather buy in Brentwood where the assessments aren't quite so high and I don't get as much bang for my buck, but I don't have to pay all those taxes. So it's just kind of a preference to the buyer, really. But
thank you.
if they're, but if they're worried about underground, gas lines, if they're worried, if they're worried about any of those things, it's in the report. And I think it's a good question so I'd like to go back and do my buyer consultation class again, because I cover areas of concern, like what they need to be investigating in terms of their due diligence as buyers, what they should be looking for in terms of disclosure. And you'll learn a lot about what your clients are worried about. They'll be like, hey, I heard that, there's, we don't want to repeat of San Bruno. We heard that there's something there. Is my property, going to be in one of those zones? So the reports are good for all of those things. Let me pull up let's see. Got all the way out of here, unfortunately. No, I didn't ask you to search my Mac. I asked you to search Dropbox. Damn it. Let me find the TDS. I wanted to go through the TDS. Can you guys see my screen?
No,
Is it blank again? Damn it.
Yeah.
Why are you doing that? Whoops. Sorry. Okay, screen share again. I don't know why it doesn't just let me switch from screen to screen. Huh. Okay, now can you see it?
yes,
So a lot of times, it's not as common in East Contra Costa County. We handle things a little bit differently out here, but especially over the hill, Tri-Valley area, Dublin, Alameda County, and then all over, Danville, San Ramon, Alamo, Walnut Creek, Pleasant Hill, all those areas out there. In a lot of other areas, they do all of the disclosures up front. I personally try and do all my disclosures up front because I would rather that people making an offer already had some sort of an informed, they're informed at least before they make an offer and they're doing all their inspections. Now, if I can get my clients to pay for inspections, at least a home and a pest inspection up front, that's ideal. I like to do that so that they know what's coming at them. That way there are no surprises down the line. However, sometimes people just don't want to spend that money. And that's okay. But I always like to, if there's a disclosure packet available to me, I always like to see what's on there. I always like to kind of like give it a quick glance before my clients see it, because undoubtedly they're going to have some sort of questions, right? And they're expecting that even though even though we reiterate to them that the disclosures are coming from the seller and we're relying upon their information, because this is our line of work, we're considered to be experts in the field. And so we should know how to at least, walk through the disclosures with them so that they kind of have a general idea of what they're going to be covering. So on the TDS, the first page is basically just the biggest portion of it is, what's in the property, whether and this is important too, whether the seller is or is not occupying the property. So the disclosures, especially the seller property questionnaire, may look a lot different if it's not owner occupied. If it's been tenant occupied for 10 years and the owners aren't living there, they may not be as privy to information about the property as someone who's currently living in it, which, makes sense, right? So page 1 of the TDS is basically just designed to say what's in the property, how old is the roof, what type. In this particular case, she didn't even fill in the type of the roof. I don't know how we missed that because this is one of my files. Oh, this was corrected because we didn't have, this is before, and then we ended up correcting this one. I remember now. Anyway, so they're supposed to list everything that they've got in the property. Pretty straightforward. There's not a whole lot to that. It's not difficult to understand if something, is or is not in the property. Sometimes, like, I've seen people fill things out and I think they're just kind of going too fast and they weren't paying attention. And then I've had to go back to my clients and say, hey, you missed a section. Can you, review this again? I think you may have missed something. On this particular one, this was interesting. So this was a really contentious divorce situation. So getting the disclosures for them was a little bit difficult. And they were kind of like half filled out by one person and half filled out by the other person. And so it was not great. So I had to go back to them for a couple of things. The gas supply was utility and they didn't do that. They had window screens. They didn't mark that. So there was just things that they just generally missed. They're just not paying that close of attention. If it's your seller, make sure that they're filling out everything to the best of their ability. Big section on page 2 of the TDS is if there's any known defects. So this is important when you've got a seller. A perfect example I'll use is my parents. They had a place up in Lake Almanor. They've been living there for probably 10 years. They did a lot of work to the property. When they bought the property, there was a problem with the electrical and all the wiring. Well, they kind of dealt with that for a while. And then before they went to sell, they fixed it. So their question was like, and this will come up on the SBQ. So my mom's like, well, do we have to disclose that there was an electrical issue if we fixed it? I'm like, you are always safer to say that there was an issue and that we resolved it. So when they filled out their transfer disclosure statement, they didn't say there was a problem with the electrical system because it had been resolved. But on the seller property questionnaire, there's an area where it'll ask you if there's been any repairs or corrections made, right? And so that's where they'd want to list it. If they know that there's some sort of an issue, then they should mark it and they should do the best that they can to explain it. The forms are designed to kind of probe them and to remind them potentially of what things have happened. I've had people who have filled out their transfer disclosure statement and their seller property questionnaire who've had insurance claims that didn't even mark it. The question very literally asks you if there was any insurance claims. So like if you're dealing with a seller and you know that there's something that's happened on the property, you might have to have them go back and rethink what they did. Because disclosure is key. That's the way to avoid litigation. Disclose, disclose, disclose. Anything material in nature that would affect the buyer's decision to buy the property should be disclosed. Questions on this? We've got some foundation issues out here in Discovery Bay, like Hoffman Homes have got some foundation issues. So
Monica,
yeah.
I have a question. It's Lisa.
Hi.
Hi, sorry. So your seller didn't complete the roof, the type of roof, which I think is a very common question that's probably missed because a lot of people probably don't know what type of roof they have. Do we have some sort of cheat sheet that we can that's probably, whatever that we can follow? Composite?
We don't have a cheat sheet, but like 90% of what we have out here is either composition shingles or tile. In older portions of, and by the way, people know, like, I'm sure you know what kind of roof you have in your house that's brand new, right? I know what kind of roof I have on my both houses. If they absolutely don't know, we could probably help them a little bit, but they should know what they have. There's sections of Pittsburgh that are really old where they actually have tar and gravel. I haven't really seen like shake roof very often. I'm trying to think of a subdivision that actually right across from Walmart in Antioch, there's a subdivision over there that's off of it's not quite Pruitt Ranch. It's literally directly across from next to Walmart. There's a church that used to be like an Ace Hardware and Orchard Supply or something like that. There's a subdivision right across the street from that. And some of those roofs in there are shake. I mean, we don't see wood shake roofs very often, but they do exist in some places. And especially for those of you that are selling, outside of, East Contra Costa County, you may be dealing with some homes that are considerably older than what we're used to selling here. Like most of what we have, majority of what we have is newer construction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
so,
could we use a cheat sheet though? Like, could we ask our roof inspector?
yeah, I don't know why not. I mean, that's a great idea.
Right? Like that would be an alternative because I mean, I think I would be guessing on most of them.
Yeah.
When you're looking from the ground and you're looking up, you're like, they all start to kind of look the same.
Yeah. And generally each subdivision is continuous in that regard. A builder will use all tile roofs, like in my subdivision. Some of them will use composition shingle. So it's an entire subdivision is generally made of the same roofing material. I have seen issues over the years where, potentially they started to have some sort of an issue with what they installed. And so moving forward on different phases, they may have done alternate roofing, but anyways, for what that's worth. Okay.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. They didn't note that there was anything wrong. If there was, they'd have to describe it. They can, add on additional pages to explain something if there isn't enough room on the transfer disclosure statement or the SPQ. So then it's pretty straightforward. They start going through and asking the key questions, is there something hazardous on the property? That they're aware of. The big thing is that they are aware of. So if it's a property that they just bought 2 years ago and they're not aware of something and they honestly don't know, they're going to mark no. This was another thing that I had to have her correct. She marked that there was no common adjoining landowners, walls, fences, or driveways. Almost every subdivision in Brentwood, Oakley, Discovery Bay, they all have like fences, right? You have adjoining fences. So she had to fix that. And usually people mark yes, and they'll say, shared fences with neighbors. Encroachments or easements. This will come up on preliminary title reports sometimes and be an issue. Easements, encroachments and easements, there's a couple of different things. So an easement, if you don't already know, and you probably already do, an easement is basically a portion of the property that somebody else has access to. The most common easements that we see are like PG&E. Sometimes lighting, like district lighting. Sometimes, like I have a client that was selling a property on Brookside Drive in Antioch, and he had a street light on the corner front of his property. Guaranteed that there's an easement because the city has to be able to maintain that. So there's going to be an easement. If you walk up to someone's house and there's a big, like utility box type thing in their yard, there's probably an easement. People don't always know what that means. And so that's something where you might need to, help them with that. You're not going to like ever fill out the forms for them, but if they have that question, like, hey, I saw a street light in the front of your property, there's probably an easement, right? If it's a known easement, the plot map that's provided by the title company will show the section that is where the easement exists. Probably in your studies, in your real estate studies, they would have talked about maybe an area where there was a thorough or like some sort of a path through somebody's property that had been used for 15 years, by one neighbor to access the other neighbor, to get to their property. They came across a neighbor's property. That kind of happens more out in like land, in like the land transactions when you're out in like the more of the rural areas and country. I have a client that's on Thule Lane, and a portion of his property, there's basically a dirt driveway that leads to the neighbor's property. The neighbor doesn't actually have a section on his property for that at all. And they kind of agree that that's an encroachment, and that kind of generally, because it's been there for so long and it's not bothering my client, that the easement has just kind of remained there. Questions on that? Nope. Okay. So rooms, additional structural modifications and alterations and repairs that were made without necessary permits. Hopefully no one's made repairs without permits, but let me tell you, people make improvements and do stuff all the time without permits, all the time. If you come across a situation where, and this happens frequently, somebody will buy a house, original tax records show it's 3 bedrooms. Your client buys the property, it says it's 4 bedrooms. Tax records don't reflect that. If the listing agent was smart about it, they say that the tax records don't match the actual property. On your agent visual inspection disclosure, this is where you would want to put in the extra area, a known facts. You could say that the tax records don't match the actual property floor plan. And that you could say that if there's any sort of construction, you just say permits were unknown. If you don't know if there were permits, you just write permits unknown. People can, like in the city of Brentwood, for example, you can go to the city and they can give you a permit roll for a property. You can't do it, but your clients can do it, and they can find out. And I would especially encourage it if it's a property that's been remodeled and maybe the tax records don't quite match up. I would get a permit roll and make sure that it was done properly. A lot of times people will pull the permits, but then they don't get the final sign off. I don't know if it's laziness or I don't really know what the deal is, but they don't do it. They don't get the final permitted sign off. So most cities will provide the buyer information on whether or not permits were pulled for that particular property. Not in compliance with the building code. Again, that's what permits are for. Building codes are supposed to be honored. That's the whole point of permitting and signing off on things, is to make sure that things are compliant. Fill compacted or otherwise areas. I believe that there are sections of Pittsburgh that are on landfill. That would certainly be a disclosure. If the property was new construction, that'd be a disclosure from the builder, whether or not they were building on landfill. It's not really that much of an uncommon problem. Settling from slippage, sliding, or other soil problems. So in the state of California, all these forms are statewide, right? So we don't exactly have the same issues that they do in Malibu, where you have a house sliding down the sea edge cliff, right? But the form is statewide, so it's intended to address that. There was a property that I had heard about on one of my legal seminars at one point. It was a property in Martinez, and there was a brand new retaining wall that had been built. And on the TDS and the SPQ, the seller didn't make any note to the fact that there had been previous landslide issues there. Buyer moves in, they aren't there for very long, and basically there's like this whole landslide event occurs. The retaining wall doesn't hold it. They ultimately, and it was so significant that they ultimately ended up having some sort of foundation damage to the property. So how likely do you think that the buyer was going to sue the seller for non-disclosure of previous exact same issues? They just didn't reveal it to the buyer. Buyer didn't know. So sellers have to be aware. They have to disclose anything that they know. Flooding and draining. So sometimes you'll have, and usually home inspectors will call this out too, and sometimes pest inspectors too. But if there's draining and the water isn't draining away from the property, people will generally mention that, because it should drain away from the property. It shouldn't drain to. It should be graded in a fashion that all water should drain, away from the home, so as not to jeopardize the integrity of the structure. Make sense? So damage to the property, earthquake, floods, landslides. In that particular case I was mentioning, there was a landslide that caused damage. They made the repairs and didn't tell the buyer that they'd done that. Like if they had informed the buyer may not have bought the property. Now there's a big lawsuit, yeah, you get it. So zoning violations. So this one's kind of an interesting one. So we live in a society where things are conforming, non-conforming. My property on Brentwood Boulevard is a perfect example of this. Like a million years ago, the place was a gas station. At some point along the line, it ceased to be a gas station. The underground tanks were removed. Then it was like a barber shop and like maybe an auto shop or something at some point. So the existing structure and the way that it is not conforming with Brentwood's downtown or Brentwood Boulevard specific plan. So any change to the property now has to come up to conforming standards. So currently my property is conforming, non-conforming. Does that make sense? If they want to do a single thing on that property, they have to bring it up to current day conforming standards per the city of Brentwood building department. Make sense? So I don't have a zoning violation. Sometimes you'll see, I've seen zoning violations where someone modified a structure without permission and that would cause a zoning violation. I don't see it very often, especially not in the city of Brentwood because they're all over you, but I could see in other cities where maybe they don't have quite the oversight that you could have zoning violations that could pop up. Like I said, non-conforming uses, and violations of setback requirements. So, my property on Brentwood Boulevard, again, I'll use that as an example. There's literally not even a 3-foot setback. The end of the building almost touches the wall that divides the front property from an apartment complex behind. Normally, there's got to be a minimum standard of, I think, of at least 5 feet or something between buildings. So there's certain setback requirements, right? In this particular case, he got plans approved through the city of Brentwood that didn't require a specific 5-foot setback. He only built in a 3-foot setback so he could have access to the entire exterior of the building simply for maintenance purposes. So there may be some setback requirements. In Discovery Bay, there are setback requirements for the docks. I think they have to be like 10 feet apart or something like that. If you ever have anything that you're dealing with out here in Discovery Bay, there's something called Recreation 800, and they're responsible for maintenance of the levees. And they also can give you a great deal of information they can give you something called a mooring map. I don't know if they charge for the mooring maps, but the mooring maps actually show you the setback requirements and basically how large of a boat you could have on those docks to maintain the setback requirements. What else? Let's see. Neighborhood noise and nuisances. So this is an important one. I had a property over on Fall Lane in Oakley, and it backed directly to a gas station with a car wash. So when they filled out the transfer disclosure statement, they had to mark yes, and they had to write in here that there was a gas station with a car wash behind them, because that sound was heard even when you had the windows closed in their house. It is fair to say that if someone can't hear it unless the windows are open, they can put that in here. When the windows are open, I can hear the car wash or the gas station, right? That's important because some people want tranquility, and if they hear the road, they don't want to hear the road. I have my home in Brentwood is, it's behind so my home's on the corner of Sand Creek and Fairview. And there's Resurrection Ministries is a church right there on the corner. My house is behind that. So if I have my windows open there, I can hear Sand Creek. The church offers a great buffer. And when I first moved there wasn't like a busy Sand Creek at all. Now it's pretty busy. So now you can hear it, but a lot of people just kind of get used to it. But it is important for people, to understand that there could be noise. CC&Rs. Pretty much every subdivision has their CC&Rs, and there might be some restrictions or obligations, but primarily it's one with, homeowners association really have like a larger authority over the actual property. And if there is an HOA, they, somebody needs to know, right? They don't have to mark anything if there isn't an issue. Common areas. So if if it's an HOA, if there's pools or tennis courts or anything like that, that's, important to know. Notice of abatements or citations against the property. The city of Brentwood, they have changed their code enforcement department and renamed it community enrichment, which I think is interesting. But community enrichment outreach program is to make sure that people's landscape on the exterior of their homes is up to snuff, essentially. So, if somebody had received a notice of abatement, against their property for, landscape or whatever, whether it's remedied or not, they should make note of it. The city, I had a client that literally it's a husband and wife. Wife is, he's blind, he's legally blind, so he is not able to work. The wife works, there's 3 kids, they don't have a lot of money. Their front yard was like pretty much dead because they couldn't afford to do anything with it. And the city of Brentwood was all over them. 50% of it had to be vegetation and it had to be green. So, I basically took them to Home Depot and let them get stuff and they fixed it. But, abatement is definitely an issue. Sometimes, I don't think the city of Antioch is nearly as strict on that. It just depends on the municipality, really. What else? Lawsuits. So if there was something that, that they had a Liz Pendens, a quiet title action, they had a mechanics lien, anything like that, that would need to be addressed. If there's litigation, so Sand Bay Isle out here in Discovery Bay, I'll use that as an example. That particular homeowners association, their fees have gone up dramatically. The homeowners association itself was not managed very well financially, and it has been in and out of litigation. So it's important, if someone knows that they have to disclose that to a potential buyer. Make sense? Okay. So there is a section here that says the seller certifies, pardon me, at close of escrow that the property has to be, that the safety codes have to be met. So basically smoke detectors, a carbon monoxide detector, and they have to have the properly strapped water heater. Let's see. I think that's primarily it for the transfer disclosure statement, aside from the fact that there's the agent visual inspection disclosure that will be included as well. Any questions on that one? Let me pull up a seller property questionnaire. And then I'll screen share again since it didn't like it. Oh, wait, is this one blank? No, it's filled out. Okay, let me screen share. Okay, how are we looking on time here, too, ladies? Can you see that? Or is it small? Can you see the whole screen? Yeah, okay. So the seller property questionnaire is like very straightforward. It's not a substitute for the TDS. They're meant to coincide with each other. They're meant to ask specific probing questions that would prompt the seller to disclose anything material in nature. And there's like huge bold print right here, right? You need to disclose the limitations, what you're supposed to be doing, what you're not supposed to be doing. Known material or significant items. That's really the bottom line. If they know something about the property that would materially affect the buyer's decision to buy it, they have to disclose it. So the first thing on the actual seller property questionnaire is there or has there been a death on the property in the last 3 years? And that's important to know. If there was a death, they have to disclose it. They don't have to say necessarily what the death was caused of, but most people, especially if say that there was an elderly individual that died of natural causes or, whatever it is, there are certain cultures where a death on the property means an absolute no purchase. And so they need to be very truthful about that. If it's longer than 4 years ago, you don't have to disclose it. That's what the statutory says. It's very clear on that. I had a situation a couple years ago where there was a death on the property prior to my client or it was one of our agents. she listed the property and sold it. When her client bought the property, there was a disclosure that there had been a death on the property previously. They sold within, so like the death had happened the year before the people bought it. So in theory, knowing that there was a death on the property prior to them owning the property, but they knew that it had been within the 3 years, they should disclose that there was a death on the property. In this particular case, what ended up happening was we closed escrow. The neighbor comes over and tells the buyer that there was a murder at the property a couple years back. Now, I am not sure that the seller of the property that our agent represented, I don't know that they knew the extent or what the circumstances were of the death. And then the buyer ended up calling the police department to get a report and blah, 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 blah. It ended up being okay, but one of our agents was a little bit panicked for a minute because she's like, oh my God, I didn't know. And I didn't disclose that. I'm like, well, you can't disclose something you didn't know. So you're fine. You didn't know that there was a death on the property. What had happened was she was out of town when the buyer reviewed the disclosures. She didn't actually see the seller property questionnaire where it said there'd been a death on the property. So she kind of lucked out because in theory, she should have seen that. She should have reviewed that. It would have been, I think, difficult to hold her responsible. But the buyer knew. Bottom line is the buyer knew when they bought the property that there had been a death and they were okay with it. So it was a good thing. If there's a meth lab, I haven't really seen a meth lab, so to speak. I have seen grow houses for sure, especially in the foreclosure days and short sale days. I definitely saw multiple grow houses. If somebody was part of that, they've got to disclose that kind of stuff. I had a grow house in the basement of a property I sold in Oakland. That was good times. Industrial zone. So remember I was mentioning it, that my client had a property on Falling and Oakley, it back to a commercial and / industrial. It's industrial area. It's important to disclose that. People need to know that. If you're ever in a situation where you have a property and it backs to, like, for instance, it backs to Fairview, backs to Sand Creek, it backs to, Griffith. I mean, there's the dozens and dozens of streets in Brentwood, Garin Ranch, where there's consistent traffic. What I usually do is on my agent visual inspection disclosure, I will simply say that the subject property backs to, Fairview, which is considered to be a major thoroughfare. Boom. I've just covered that. Formal federal state ordinance locations. So like conquered areas, like the munitions, underground munitions. I don't know if that was Army or whatever that was over there. So that could come up on the NHD report if something was close to military training grounds or anything like that. Whether the property is located in a condo, that's pretty straightforward. Whether there's any insurance claims, if they had what's a good example? They were out of town, a toilet flooded, ruined all the flooring in the bathroom and all the carpet in the hallway, and they did an insurance claim. Then they need to say that happened in the last 5 years. I had a situation where fire sprinklers had gone off and did some pretty significant damage. The buyer was having a hard time getting insurance on the property, and it was because there was a claim within the last 5 years. We're able to find it, get it taken care of, so it was no big deal, but still it can come up. I'm trying to be quick because I know if you have to go. And then matters affecting title. So again, if there's a mechanics lien, a Liz pendant, something that would potentially cause an issue in transfer of title would be there. And then again, they listed again material facts that could be affecting that was otherwise not disclosed to the buyer. Then it goes into repairs and alterations, and it's pretty straightforward. It asks if there was anything done, if so, what was done, if there was any painting done, etc. Pretty straightforward. They ask, especially if the property is built before 1978, what kind of work was done, because there could be lead-based paint. Structural systems, they've included this now so that we've got on the seller property questionnaire, the solar system is listed here. There's also a separate solar questionnaire that the seller can fill out, which is awesome. That's really great to have. Disaster relief, this would be like the situation where Santa Rosa, where they had all the fires and whatnot, that would be a situation. Water related or mold issues, if they know anything about that. If they had mold remediation, they would need to disclose that because people can get really sick from that. And then of course, pets and animals. So, sometimes people are highly allergic to pets. So they would need to know if pets have been on the property. It may be kind of a deal breaker for them. Livestock, that's more like out on the, in the country parts, but, important thing to kind of note, Jeff Carter had a property up in Deer Ridge. It was at the very end of a cul-de-sac on Blue Oak. It backed to a huge like open space to the back and then to the right to a golf course. Buyers moved in and they were all upset because they had skunks, raccoons, and other things coming into their yard, and they didn't think that that was properly disclosed to them. So, interesting, but yeah, it happens. Boundaries. So surveys, if you're doing a property, especially on land, an acre or whatever, get a survey. We had an agent in our office that had a buyer. Buyer walked the property with the seller. Seller noted the boundaries of the property, closes escrow. Buyer decides to rip out a whole row of like, I can't remember what kind of shrub it was, but it was potentially toxic to dogs, and they had a lot of dogs. And so they actually, so they actually got into this huge dispute because come to find out, they were actually encroaching on the neighbor's land. So super important to get a survey. The seller doesn't always know exactly what the property boundaries are. Maybe the seller wasn't aware. Maybe they were given misinformation when they bought the property. It doesn't really matter. But after that happened, I strongly encourage anyone dealing with a land transaction to get a survey to be safe. Use of any neighboring property by you. That would be like potential easement, like maybe part of your driveway is on the neighbor's property. There's a property on Byron Highway where the entire septic system is on the neighbor's yard, on the neighbor's land. That's kind of problematic. That had to be disclosed. Landscape, pool, spa. So that's just all questions about that. If there was diseased trees or something that needed to be dealt with, the buyer should be made aware. In areas like, kind of like in the foothills when they've got pine trees and stuff like that, I've seen areas there where a whole section of trees were diseased and people had to have them fallen. So condominiums, same thing, whether they know that there's any, like say they know that there's going to be an increase in dues or special assessments that are coming up. That happened in Sand Bay Isle. Seller needs to disclose that if they're aware of that. What you don't want to have happen is your buyer moves in and then all of a sudden there's a $200 increase on the homeowners association and the buyer was unaware. And maybe they can't afford it. Maybe it's, I wouldn't be happy if my fees went up $200 and no one told me. So if the seller had access to that information, they should have known. Also, the HOA documents should have actually covered that. But sometimes things get missed. So, and then title and ownership. Sometimes people have a power of attorney or it's a foreclosure or something, and they have trustee rights to actually sell the property, but it's important to know if there's any leases or anything that affect that, the ownership. That's also important to know. Neighborhood, and again, I discussed this earlier, but like neighborhood noise, nuisance, parking congestion, like if you're in the flight path in like Livermore, for instance, from the airport, that would be important to note. And then governmental. So basically, if you know that there's going to be something coming up where they're intending to change the use of an area or something, and the seller knows that, they should make the buyer aware. And this is new. Any occupant of the property smoking or vaping any substance on the property, past or present, that's a new question that's coming up, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not really that surprised. Cannabis cultivation or growth, that's also on there. Okay, I was trying to run through that quick so you guys can get to that class. Is that help? Do you find that helpful?
Yeah, I think
hear
it's very helpful. Thank you, Monica.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then I'd like to, at another point, I would love to go over a home inspection and a pest inspection with you guys. That's just like, just getting through the NHD, the TDS, and the SPQ is obviously a whole hour. So I'll do something on just the reports so that you can kind of take a quick glance when your clients are asking you if there's something to be aware of. They do that all the time. Like, do you see any issues on these reports? So we should have a general idea of how to, discuss that with them and arm them with the information that they need so they can make an informed decision, right? Okay, well, I won't keep you all. I know you're trying to head to that other class. Please take notes for me. It sounds like it's going to be really great. I've got an appraiser coming in next month. I'm super excited. He's really awesome. So we'll get some more information on that as well. So good stuff.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Monica.
Uh,
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Monica.
Monica.
You're so welcome.
Appreciate it.